Welcome to the audio series of lectures by the International Guild of Occult Sciences College and Research Society, the only source of unbiased occult information available today, dedicated to occult science truth. We're going to cover today is, of course, one of the most well-known occultist of all time, and that is Aleister Crowley. I'm really sick and tired of hearing about this guy and the slavishly group of pseudo-intellectual morons that follow his goofball writings. It's really pathetic that occultists glom onto this perverted, sick fuck. And I'm tired of hearing about him and his sense of humor and his British bullshit. It's just really pathetic. And what's more pathetic with all these things is that all you have to do is really research a little bit. There's several books on his life, one of which we've below this audio. You will see a link to where you can read about him, read his books, and also autobiographies that were actually done by about him. And there are many out there, and really it's a waste of ink ultimately. And he's written many different books, including pornographic poetry and everything else. And, you know, whatever your... some people like to put him down for that, but, you know, so what? It's just a part of sexuality. If you enjoy pornography or pornographic poetry, so what? The problem is how much of this is your personality. I have a real problem with people who are occultists or in general who tend to define themselves by their sexuality. I mean, homosexuals, that Aleister Crowley was, do this all the time. Well, I'm a homosexual. Well, what do you mean you're homosexual? That's your life? Yep, that's it. I'm homosexual. Well, what does that mean? If you're defining your life by your sexuality, you're a pretty petty person. If you're caught up in that as your life in terms of everything revolves around like that, that's pretty sad. Most people, if you talk to them who are heterosexual, don't state that, you know, who are you? What do you do? Well, I'm heterosexual. Yeah, that's what I do. I'm a heterosexual. You have well, I got a career and other things. Well, I got a job, got a car. Yeah, well, I'm a heterosexual. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But the problem is with homosexuals is that it dominates their life. And everything they do, they put that sexuality into it. Now, heterosexuals do the same to an extent. And it is a problem with those, particularly those that have fetishes, who list their fetishes at the end of the books they write. You know, this happens, obviously, and it shows a very small mind in general. But the story of Aleister Crowley is quite interesting in some aspects, and almost cliche-ish to the fact that he came from a radical Christian fundamentalist cult. His father was pretty much what we considered a complete nut job, really radical fundamentalist. And so he was brought up in this, and apparently his parents had great disgust for him, and he didn't get along with them and didn't get along with his mother. But one nice little thing for the little pervert was the fact that Daddy made a lot of money. And Daddy died when he was fairly young. I think it was 8, 11, somewhere in there. I'm not really sure. And as such, he was left quite a bit of money for that particular time. It's really hard to say. I've read figures of which will be 300,000 or equivalent to 300,000 in this time, or probably more than that. You got to remember in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you know, $50,000 was a fortune. You know, cars cost $2,000, homes cost $5,000. You're talking about huge amounts of money, but maybe not enough to last a lifetime. Certainly didn't for him. But it's nice to have daddy and mommy send you to all sorts of schools, and through the typical British educational system that apparently all affluent British children go through, which is their satanic homosexual breeding grounds they call the private school system, or I guess they call it public there. Public means private, or whatever. Another one of those silly British things. So it's nice to do that, and of course, that means that you're going to be properly Illuminati trained. You're going to have a certain vocabulary. You're going to be able to write correctly. And all those little things that the modern, feeble little snail mind world of today values so much. Instead of looking at content, they look at if you've dotted your I's. So that, of course, helped him and gave him a huge start. If he did not have money, he would have ended up, quite frankly and very crudely, sucking cocks in London for $5 at a time. I mean, let's get real here. He had no skills, he had no abilities, except for the fact of a fine British education, which allowed him to write his own personal fetishes. And I should say to indulge in his own personal fetishes, and be able to write about what he wanted. He wanted to be a poet, like so many people in this world who wanted to be what they couldn't be and developed into something else. There's no money in poetry. There never was, there never is, and there never will be. You can't write that type of thing and get a following to make a living off of it. So he published he published all his own books. Nobody would touch him. That's interesting. That shows a lot of magical power. And indulged himself as much as he could in his own little interests, until he needed to branch out and wanted the egotistical publicity of getting involved in things. We also have to understand that he has never achieved anything. Any grade he got almost entirely in his entire life in terms of magical grades or titles or everything else, he bought. And let's get that clear. He bought. He claimed to be this 32nd degree Mason. Well, it was apparently verified that it was some obscure but recognized lodge, and I'm not really sure that's still true. But like almost every 32nd degree Mason I've ever met, nobody spends the time to learn that dribble, that ceremonial nonsense that has no occult value. It's all goofy mysticism that has no power at all. It's just ritual for the sake of ritual. Which so many people like, dance around in funny costumes and whirl a sword or whatever it is that those people do and wear funny little hats. I mean, if you look pictures of the Golden Dawn when they got together, you will see of the ridiculous outfits they wear. And they wear the same right now. And of course, they're really into that, particularly when the Golden Dawn was invented and started by the floppy aristocratic class of writers that did put that system together. So he indulged himself, but he needed to branch out because he was going absolutely nowhere and wanted to get into things that he could manipulate and have fun with daddy's money. And interesting is that this right-wing fundamentalist made his money by, of all things, selling booze, particularly beer, apparently. He was a brewer. And I guess that was okay, considering most of the time all sorts of alcoholic beverages are demonized by any fundamentalist religion. So here we go again with all that nonsense. But apparently it came from an extremely fundamentalist background. One of these people that don't celebrate Christmas, don't give gifts, don't celebrate holidays. It's all about being pious and apparently being a little bit drunk and following these ridiculous systems and preaching on every street corner that you can. So it's interesting that he would come from this, but also not overly surprising because most people that come from that kind of extreme dogma either turn into David Koresh's and run their own little psychotic cult, which in some ways could be compared to Crowley and the fact of his cultish but would reject the actual. Usually you become a psychotic or you reject it entirely. And a lot of people, just like some of the largest satanic cults that there are in the United States or in the South, the Bible Belt, because people reject the Christian church and they like to go to the opposite side, which is the typical thing that Satanists state today. They hate the church. They hate the hypocritical nature of the church. So Satan's their buddy because that's the opposite of the church. Really infantile thinking. But Crowley was an infant. He never really did anything but indulge his own homosexual lusts. And of course, like most British, they are extremely homosexual and extremely bisexual, and they're pretty much taught this from their all-male schools. I don't quite understand what the purpose of that is. Segregating people in schools stops a certain amount of sexual activity, but ultimately not, because as we know in all institutions that are strictly male or female, it doesn't matter. They tend to Females tend to get off the hook on this because people enjoy seeing lesbian sexual acts, heterosexuals. Point is, there's a huge amount of lesbians out there as well. And if you don't have the opposite sex to have sexual contact with, you're going to use your own sex, especially when you're young, and it's pretty much considered experimentation and accepted, particularly in the British schools, which are extremely homosexual, and there's huge homosexual practices going on there and always have been. And it's kind of considered as part of growing up. To some extent, well, it's okay. You don't get anybody pregnant. You don't get any other families upset at you. You don't worry about daddy's money getting taken by some other family because you've impregnated them or having a bastard child of lower class. It's much better to come in some other man's asshole. So that way there is no problem there because they won't be recognized. And what's even more hypocritical about the British is that it was actually illegal to be a homosexual there. I believe very close to the time Crowley was, I don't know when it was repealed, but it actually was a crime in Britain in the late 1800s. So it's interesting that he would go through this particular school. A lot of this has to do with the fact that it's an accepted lifestyle, and accepted lifestyles, particularly in that culture, is not unusual at all to be bisexual and to lead a double life, which is common even today. I mean, this is not overly surprising. It's very common. European populations have huge homosexual, bisexual populations, as most of the world. I think it's conservative to say that it's 20 to 30% of the population is homosexual or bisexual easily. And this is swept under the carpet because people operate in the closet. People are married, yet have homosexual lovers on both sides of the fence, and it is quite common. So, regardless of that fact, that's part of the British culture to have this kind of schooling. So, and once you experience these things, not just as an experimentation as a young person, it does condition you to a certain lifestyle and acceptance that normally wouldn't experience. But most children have some sort of homosexual experimentation. But it's not institutionalized, and I don't think it goes on for years and years and with a wide variety of people and older children, etc., that are involved in these schools. Not to mention the fact that the people operating these schools, the male teachers, are pretty much pedophiles in general. These systems, as the most churches, particularly the Catholic Church, is a breeding ground and a place where homosexuals go to because it's accepted there. I've known several people who went into the Catholic Church that were homosexual because that's a good place for homosexual. Everybody in there is homosexual. ultimately, if they're sexual at all. For again, that's acceptable, and there isn't any objections to it unless there are other sexual problems. But there's all sorts of things that happen in these forbidden sexual institutions. You don't deny sexuality, you just pervert it. So the point is, all this happens, and you end up having a culture, and with the Catholic Church, you've got thousands of years of a homosexual built-in doctrine, including the Black Lodge, the Illuminati, infiltrating to make sure that they put in pedophiles and other things in there to destroy these institutions. Unfortunately, these private boys' schools are pretty much the same thing. They've had hundreds of years of people going and being part of these schools. Why would you want to be a teacher in a place like this unless you liked boys? I mean, I think that's a large part of it. So I think the faculties and staff of a lot of these schools have those leanings, and I'm positive these schools, directly or indirectly, sanction this kind of activity. It's part of that culture. And it's important to understand that, a culture that someone comes from really affects their life. But he had a unique, wealthy, upper class culture and went to these different schools. And not only that, he went to an extremely religious boarding school. And for one reason or another, which is detailed of why ultimately these schools, as I've mentioned, just like the church, have Illuminati, Black Lodge people that infiltrate it to actually make psychopaths and Satanists and sociopathic people. That's part of what they do. And Crowley was one of those that was chosen to be made into that. Because one of the teachers actually there who a student stated that Crowley was seen drunk on a holiday, and for some reason, why this would be a problem with the boozing British, I have absolutely no idea. But apparently the teacher used this as an excuse to torture, starve to death, beat, and do every possible thing, damaging his whole mind through this living on bread. I mean, this is the extremes that went on here, living on bread and water and almost to being starved to death and being tortured by this teacher with innumerable acts. And while there was no statement that he was sexually abused, I can guarantee you he was, because this is an exact copy of how the mind control abuse system works to convert people into Black Lodge members and into sociopaths. This is done recently in America in the Montauk Project, which the children of Montauk, the same exact type of things are done with homosexual practices and torture and all the other things that go with that. So basically, it almost destroyed him, almost ruined his health, but certainly affected him mentally and turned his already fair disgust with the church into a complete hatred, a vehement hatred for the destruction of the church. And after all, who can blame him? Here is this virtuous institution that he was sent to by his family because it was supposed to be a radical fundamentalist organization that they belonged to. It was ran by the same people that they were members of the church. And he was tortured and abused, and as I said, I'm sure there was major sexual abuse. But even after that, he was sent to another school where Crowley states that sodomy was a daily practice and just part of being there. And you can guarantee this went on, and older students, I'm sure, abused all the younger students. And, when you get into the system and it becomes okay as their sexual outlet because there is nothing else, it creates an entire culture and an entire way of thinking. These rich kids then go on to all sorts of government jobs and other institutions, and it just is normal. And then their children go through the same thing. So it's very common in that particular school system and in the British culture in general. This is how they operate. Um, so it's important to know that. So his entire sexuality was formed during this torture and then introduction into common homosexual practices as a lifestyle. So I don't know. Crowley was able to function as a bisexual, but he was almost forced into functioning on that level. In terms of the fact is that at the particular time he was popular, coming out as a homosexual was unheard of. I guess it was accepted considering how homosexual the British culture is in general, but like most cultures, it was not accepted. As I said, it was illegal there, which is almost staggering to think that homosexuality was illegal in a British culture. It just amazes me. And even today, this continues with this bisexual type culture there. I recently watched the UK Big Brother, and they had some young guys in there, and they were taking showers together. Can you imagine that in American culture? And they weren't homosexual, just, well, let's take a shower together. I don't know, maybe they were doing something in there since their girlfriends in the Big Brother house are not there, and they didn't have any sexual outlets. But, it's thought as perfectly fine there. So, his forced bisexuality so that he could function was the case with him. The fact that he got married and almost had a kid and I guess did have a child that died at an early age from disease. Got married. I mean, the list of married homosexuals is probably 70% of them, not to mention the huge population that's married that really is homosexual, that doesn't want to come out, period, for a lot of the same reasons that Crowley didn't come out. There's problems in society. Most homosexuals want to have families. I mean, we see this all the time now with homosexuals adopting children and having surrogates. So it's not very surprising. But at the same time that he was functioning, Oscar Wilde, the famous writer, came out as a homosexual. And he was attacked viciously and got into numerous problems with coming out, and the entire society there turned against him and ridiculed and persecuted him. Crowley, seeing this, decided at that time that he would never admit to any of that, yet he had constant homosexual relationships and associates and apprentices and on and on and on. So I think it's quite obvious whether he was born, and most sexuality, I believe, is not a choice, but it doesn't mean that can't be conditioned into you through torture. At least the accepting of it, and not to dwell on the subject too much, but the whole bisexual contact thing, if you read through history, is quite common. And quite common with, of all people, the warrior class. Samurais used to take young boys into the battlefield, and that was their sexual outlet. The Spartans, the great Spartans, the 300 that stood off all these great armies, it was common to have a homosexual partner or an apprentice. But it wasn't the fact that that's all they did. It was part of it, just like the samurai came back to their wives and families, but they also did this. The bisexuality of mankind is quite common, and of course, this has really not changed that much except for the ridicule of it in modern society. I mean, Asia is still very accepting of these practices, and it's not as offensive there. While in some other cultures, it's very offensive. The Western world is getting more and more acceptance of it because there's so many there. Of course, very conservative cultures tend to rebel against it and even have death penalties, such as in Africa and Islam. But if you look at Islam, it's a very homosexual culture with kissing and hand holding, because after all, you got to have some affection since you can't touch a woman. So what do you think that breeds? The amount of homosexuality in Islam is huge, just huge. It's commonly accepted and commonly practiced. It's as this move until you're married, and then I wonder if it stops. but it's common for effeminate men in Islam that they are arrested and raped by all the macho men and gang rapes. I guess they're going to prove how bad it is to be a homosexual by doing homosexual acts. That's a typical thing in Islam. Really amusing. But to get back into Aleister Baby here, so basically that was his sexuality, and because it was warped and because he could be a rich flop and do what he wanted, he decided, even after not being able to really achieve what he wanted to, he went to colleges but never really completed. Most of his life is all about not completing everything, because he didn't have to. He had money from mommy. He could write plays, and he wanted to be an actor. I mean, he's a real egotistical showman who wanted to be the center of attention. And he didn't bother really trying to have, he's constantly saying how he would hire prostitutes and everything else, and loved excesses in alcohol and any type of drug he could get his hands on. But he never really achieved anything. As with the Masons, he bought his title, even though the order that he bought it from is kind of legitimate. But he never achieved those stages. So he bought that. The only thing he didn't buy was the first grade of the Golden Dawn, which he was forced to complete and to participate properly in, because it was a fairly good structure and they were serious people and they weren't going to just let anybody. They denied him from going into the inner order and denied him to go into the second order because he was such a little nasty prick, and an evil one at that. So what he did, of course, is he went over to the head of the order, who was living in Paris at that time, MacGregor, who everybody's probably heard of that knows anything. And who, of course, like most occult people, MacGregor was a genius, apparently hard to get along with, but did a lot of work and contributed to the occult world by translating a lot of very important grimoires that are in use today. But like most people, like most occultists in general, he was unable to really do any kind of a job, didn't have any money, and like most people, and rich people in particular, and particularly the sons and daughters of rich people who are trust fund babies, love to throw around how rich they are to manipulate people. So Crowley went over there and said, well, I want to be, they're not running things right over there. You should let me run the actual Golden Dawn Lodge in London. And MacGregor, thinking that he would get assistance from Crowley, who he never got a dime from, because that's part of the rich, nasty attitudes. They don't share a penny with anybody. As a matter of fact, they'll take as much as they can from you, with a smile on their face saying, don't worry, man, you'll get twice as much. I've got a lot of money. I'll take care of this. Never happened. And ultimately traitored MacGregor, who tried to help and assist him for his own sake, and thus benefiting Crowley dramatically. So with all that, and of course that didn't work, the great powerful magician Aleister went back to London and forced his way in there and told everybody he was going to take over. Even, I think, there's this whole story to it, which is, if you're interested in the intimate details of all this, I've given you very sketchy, just very basic information here. I don't want to get bogged down into long discussions. It's in the book that has a link here to it on his life. But needless to say, he was ultimately thrown out of it. The police came over there, and the great magician, with all his power, the police told him to leave, and he did. And nobody was influenced. He was unable to take over that. And if he ever came back again, he would be thrown in prison. So his great magical power did absolutely nothing. And he was not allowed to take over the main London Golden Dawn group, and was kicked out. But again, he wanted title, and I think he got some title from MacGregor by promising money again. But he never completed anything but that. He also did the famous ritual to contact these angels that MacGregor translated the grimoire of the Albermelin, which is a very strenuous way of contacting certain spirits, and you have to go through this long process of fasting and meditating. And Crowley, of course, never finished that, or Crowley, as some people like to say it. Um, so the idea is he never finished that. Another thing, and claimed to have these things, claimed to make contact with his own angel, which of course he said, well, my angel really was Satan. So when it came down to it, everything that that Aleister did, and of course he liked to say it himself, was all based in evil magic. And a lot of people like to say, of course they called him the wickedest man in the world, and so forth. And a lot of people laugh this off, but it gets to be a little tiresome and ridiculous. And when he wanted to be taken seriously, of course he couldn't be, because he spent his whole life talking about really perverted, debased things to get attention from the masses and to draw in his little sick, perverted followers. And and could never get any credibility back, if he ever had it, to begin with. The fact that he got any attention at all is amazing me in modern times. In his own time, he really wasn't known all that well, and nobody took his writings overly interesting. And basically, after his death and so forth, he was ignored. A small American lodge grew up out of, I believe, from the OTO that found his books and started republishing it and brought him back to life. These sutil intellectual types, again, that somehow find meaning in the psychobabble that he pushed out. I mean, most of his books are boring pieces of trash that he channeled from his low-level consciousness. Reading them is the most tenuous, most boring thing you can possibly do with very little practical information. He supposedly translated some books from Epis Levi, the French magician. But you can guarantee his translations are fraught with his own personal lies, just like claiming he was part of the reason why the Knights Templars were connected to the Baphomet and connected to Satanism. Just complete nonsense. He claimed them because he wanted to be cool. And he lies like this and makes falsehoods through all of his books, so they're highly suspect books. They're unreliable, and you have to really be a fool to believe anything that Aleister Crowley would ever write, because it's all about shocking people and getting attention. That's what he wanted to do. That's part of his personality. But the problem is when you keep screaming how evil you are, you tend to manifest that. And what he did. And people say, well, he wasn't really a Satanist. Well, everything he did was about satanic practices or evil magic. The fact that he didn't worship Satan directly, he sacrificed all numerous types of demons, murdering animals, small birds, all sorts of things that he sacrificed to certain entities. That's a satanic practice. That's what Satanists do to draw in energy. And the fact that he'd say his personal guardian angel that he brought in after going through that abbreviated ritual he went through is Satan. I mean, what more do you want? Oh, well, that's just it. He was quite the jokester, He loved to joke and tell tales. Well, I mean, that may be fine in a cocktail party, but when you're developing your entire occult system and writing about it and putting the garbage that he put into it, I mean, the two books he wrote that was about magic are okay. I mean, there's some good basic magical information in there with a lot of bunch of other crap that he threw in. Now, that's the problem with that. And most of it is nothing new again. It was all taken from the Golden Dawn and from everybody else he always studied with. He never came up with anything new whatsoever, except for some perverse sexual ritual of, cutting a sheep's throat or a goat's throat while he was humping somebody at the time of orgasm. And even this type of thing is not really something that he created. This is old-time satanic magic or demonic magic that goes back thousands of years. So, he would commonly go into different groups and find out what they were doing, and then he would publish it as his own. And of course, some of this is normally you learn things, you use it, but there's nothing new for him. His work is unimpressive. He has left nothing. Unlike MacGregor, who did translations of very classic grimoires that are in use today, and formulated a lot of basic, interesting systems and within the Golden Dawn and other things. But he was a complete flop and could do whatever he wanted because he had money. But apparently it wasn't all that much money, and he was always in need of money, always cheating people. He got more money from aunts and uncles and other people as he ran out of money. And in those days, you get $3,000-$4,000 that could last you a while. But he promised a lot, and he never came through. He never paid for things. He promised to pay for things, including mountain climbing expeditions he went on, and he never came through with that. It is interesting that this guy, who also supposedly was a terrible asthmatic and sick to some extent, his hobby was climbing mountains, which shows you the kind of fearlessness and physical and mental determination he really had. So, it's interesting that this kind of a rich flop would enjoy mountain climbing, which certainly is a very strenuous, dangerous, and scary practice that takes a lot of mental discipline. And he was, and what's interesting to note is that at the particular time he wanted to climb Mount Everest, and may have been the first person to ever do it if he was allowed to do it. At that particular time, Everest was closed to people. You couldn't just go there, and it wasn't an industry like it is now that everybody and their brother climbs Everest. But if it was open, he would have probably climbed it. He climbed similar mountains, and there was a debacle in one mountain climbing where some people died, and he supposedly deserted them. And again, this is detailed in his not his autobiography, but the biography about him, which may or may not be true. From my reading, it didn't appear that he necessarily deserted people. He warned them not to do things, and maybe it was too dangerous to assist. But when it came down to it, he didn't want to assist helping people or getting their bodies out of where they had died. But that figures with this kind of a guy anyway. He never helped anybody. He never assisted anybody. He never did anything for anybody else. He took and took and took. And this wasn't the first person. When he had his little cult in Italy, he refused to get medical help for a person who died from an illness there, because he refused to bring a doctor in because it would cost him a few dollars. So this is the kind of person you're talking about. This is certainly not anybody you want to be involved in and certainly study under. And his base level practical magic things can be gained from any real magical system that you can get. And certainly reading any Golden Dawn literature, if you want to get into those types of things, certainly are far superior than anything Crowley wrote. Yet people are intrigued. They like his perverted nature. They like his homosexual background. They like that he was so nasty. They like that he was evil, and there's a great attraction to evil. And people that get into magic, as I've stated many times, are social deviants as a general rule. They are rejecting society. They are rejecting the common practices. They probably have a hate against the established church, which basically is satanic anyway. There's no difference between Satanism and a church. It's both of the same. So, and that's something people misunderstand. which is explained in my lecture on Satanism and black magic. But you know, he typifies all the weird stuff that's involved. But here again, he achieved absolutely nothing. Ultimately, without getting into all the details of his life and what he did or not, I really always go with anybody at the very, the final word on all these people are. There's some excuses that you can have if someone's successful. It's not only hard, basically it's impossible to argue with success. If someone does something, regardless of how objectionable it is, and they're successful at it, you can say you don't like it, but you can't really argue with it. What works, works. And no matter how negative that is, you can't argue with it. The problem is as you research all these people, and I will have a lecture on why occultists are losers. You can watch for that. Is that he achieved absolutely nothing. Now, he was able to get away with a whole bunch as rich people are. Now, you've got to understand that rich people, everybody wants to know because they somehow think that money's going to fly out of that person's pocket and into theirs. There's something about being around rich people and that everyone becomes very subservient. And I've seen this on so many levels. I've even seen lawyers who are fairly well off being so subservient to somebody who has money. It's just amazing. And generally, these people are not going to give you a dime. You never get a dime from these people. They tend to be cheap. They don't share things. They don't have things. Most rich people have fake cars they drive around in, so when they go buy something, they're not cheated. And they basically see themselves as a completely different species than you are. And you really need to understand that. They have a lot of money. You are like a rodent. And there's millions of you, and they could care less. It's quite obvious by the way wealthy corporations and people who hire people for under the minimum wages or even less than that, overwork them. They don't give a shit. And if you have a problem, they'll just get another slave. It's as simple as that. But that's important because that's how Crowley acted. So he didn't really give a damn about anybody but himself and used everybody for his own personal fetishes, which apparently he was possessed by numerous demons, including incubuses and succubuses and everything else. But his whole magical life is really boils down to indulging in sex magic, which didn't work at all. And the bottom line is when you go through his life, he has a success rate based on important matters in his life that is less than 10%. And 10% pretty much is what's going to happen in basic mathematics, regardless of what you do. Generally, 10% of anything is going to happen whether you planned it to happen or not. So he doesn't even have above any statistical base mathematic equation success rate. His success rate is pathetic. And there's one law case after another that he lost. There's numerous people that, enemies of his, that nothing ever happened to them. It just goes on and on. He never manifested anything. He never made any money. He published all his own books. He created nothing. The fact that there's a legacy that somebody picked up his books and have republished them is more of a case of the Black Lodge Satanic following this lunatic system so they could corrupt and pervert a whole bunch of other people. It has nothing to do with him. All we know about Crowley is the fact that he was a failure and his systems will mess you up, period. And his going from semi-preachy Bible-like writings into his perverse pornography is just his entire personality. But he never achieved anything. He appeared to have very little power other than what his wallet could wield. He was able to get the head of the goofy organizations like the OTO from a group of nut jobs that wanted, again, they wanted his money and expected that he had connections and they could expand their group. He went in, and whatever the goofball OTO was to begin with, he turned it into his own little sex club, making the highest initiation in the OTO based on some fantasy stuff from the Middle East, started by some goofball nut job Germans, into his own little homosexual club. The highest degree in the OTO, which ends up in sex magic, is homosexual magic. Now, so basically, unless you get involved in serious homosexual practices, you cannot reach the highest level of the OTO. So if that's your choice, I don't have any problem with it. The point is that that almost forces you, not almost, does force you. If you want to reach the highest level, you have to participate in homosexual practices, whether you want to or not. But I mean, that's the kind of thinking and setup. He was just setting up a whole bunch of sex partners and turned the OTO into a giant homosexual organization, and everybody in it's a homosexual, or I should say a large percentage of them are. And this was just a way of Crowley getting a whole bunch of sex partners. And this is not unusual to a lot of different cults. It isn't complicated. It's very straightforward. But of course, that's how he operated, and that's what he was into. But it's critical to understand that. The problem with having, and to a certain extent, you should, if a person is a member of the OTO, you have to question their sexuality because of the fact that that's going to strongly influence their magical interpretations, writings, and practices. They're not going to keep that sexual. Homosexuals have a huge sex drive, and it's part of being labeled and pushed into being a homosexual to some extent by society, that when you're rejected, it makes you even crazier to be involved in those kind of things. So if someone is, then this means that they're going to taint everything they do. Now, some of that happens, of course, with all sexuality, but the point is that that's not every single group gets into that. I mean, Masonic initiations don't have heterosexual practices involved in them. I mean, there isn't on common levels. Who knows what goes on in some of these things, but generally, they don't involve sexual practices either way. And so many magical systems don't do that. What does all that mean? That means the fact that's if someone has this strong compulsion, and sexuality is a compulsion to begin with, and homosexuality is double the heterosexual compulsion, that this is going to greatly affect what people write about. So, all in all, this is a serious problem, and Crowley had no problem doing any of that. He wanted to do that. What did he care? He didn't need to make any money from it. He wanted to recruit people. He did recruit people. His assistants were homosexuals. His fake little marriages, the women involved in that all say that he just wanted to have anal sex with them. This is where he was at. There are numerous witnesses to all sorts of sex rituals and their magical practices that also involved animal sacrifice and etc. And some people say, oh, well, that was just written by him. Well, that's nonsense. There's plenty of witnesses that say this happened. And the fact is, if you're going to write that, then you are, and you're going to say that you participated in that. I don't know why anybody should necessarily laugh at that, whether it's made up or not. It's something you're obviously condoning. I mean, here's a guy who's in World War I, fled the country to the United States, and then because he needed money, and he always needed money, wrote anti-British propaganda for the Germans, and was actually tried in that when he returned to England, apparently. But I mean, that's the kind of scumbucket he is. Is that the only job he could get, was writing propaganda for, while millions of of his fellow Brits were being murdered in horrible ways from mustard gas and everything in that war. I mean, really. And his answer was, "Oh, did anybody take me seriously? I wrote such over-the-top nonsense. It's hard to believe that anybody would quite take me seriously." Oh, come on. I mean, enough's enough. And of course, I think it was 5 years or so. These details I give you are maybe longer, shorter, whatever. If you want the exact details, dates and other things, read the book and get the exact information. He spent his whole time doing his favorite sex magic practices, which is eating cum. And he was so powerful again that and this was basically a mixture of cum, the actual sexual fluids from the woman combined with the man, was then thought to be his elixir that produced everything. But it didn't produce anything because he didn't make a lot of money, he didn't sell a lot of books, he was barely able to survive, and basically all the women he used were prostitutes. So he couldn't even use his magic after eating all this cum to actually produce another sex maid. So, I mean, this is the kind of contradictory nonsense that people want to say how powerful they are magically. And he wasn't even able, he had to hire prostitutes. I mean, what do you call that? I mean, that's ridiculous. So he had no power whatsoever. And this fantasy of him of generating energy from this. And of course there is energy from the sexual fluids. It's primitive, low-based energies, and they're very hard to channel. But they don't produce a lot. And here's a prime person who did it for years and years. He's got a whole diary talking about eating cum every day and the results he got from it. I don't know if we have that up there or not in our reference, but we'll try and put it up if not. His diary, which is almost all his books are online for free somewhere. Basically, they're all in the public domain, even though some people claim. Of course, the OTO bought people off, apparently. It's alleged they buy people off to get ownership. And, of course, San Francisco judges, which ought to tell you something with their orientation, somehow gave some rights to the OTO for Crowley's writings, which, I think I've said enough there. But all his stuff is available online for free somewhere. And we've tried to find links to this so you can read it if you're interested. But I do find it interesting, and you should read at least the biography of him, so you have an idea, so you know the basic facts about him, because this is an important person in occultism that people may throw in your face, or if you want to discuss properly with somebody, you should have a background of understanding where he came from. So he's had very little training. He's done like most people do, and he's channeled in books that he claims he talked to spirits. The problem is that that's how you get information of a spiritual or advanced kind in general. Even scientists whose entire belief systems are based on theories or basically stories and mythology of science is what a theory is. And that's what all science is. It's a mythology. This connects here, this energy there. They just don't call them gods. That you certainly could call them gods. Are all based on these channels. So I hate to label that because information comes to you in a particular way. But again, here he channeled things in the desert with his homosexual buddy and did these rituals and so forth and so on. Like a lot of madmen, people who were very close to him were known to commit suicide. Similar to Hitler's, who's all the people he ever dated killed themselves. These are the type of things that happen when you're around these really evil, possessed people. And the practices that were done to him as a child were designed, as I said, to make him a sociopathic, possessed demon operating in common society to affect other people. And and they also chose people who they knew could support themselves independently, so they're not connected directly to them. They have a certain amount of money. But getting back to the actual proof, the bottom line is you get any person you look at, what did they achieve? What were they able to manifest? And, White Lodge people have an excuse because they can say, which now a lot of the New Age, born-again black magic practitioners want to delude you with the fact that, well, I'm so powerful from Satan, I can manifest anything I want, so it doesn't interest me. That's why I drive a bicycle. That's why I live in this box on the street. I don't need a house. I don't need a car. At least White Lodge people have higher aspects and not connected to materialism to the same level that Satanists are, which is supposed to be the most decadent lifestyle of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now they want to be born again because they can't produce that kind of lifestyle to the public and show them. I guess only Hugh Hefner can do that. So what have they produced? And time again, you can go through this book we have, and you can see how everything he ever did, he failed at. He was unable to influence anybody. He had all sorts of problems. I mean, he had his cult going in Italy, and Mussolini kicked him out of Italy. Well, why couldn't he spell Mussolini and not be? Why couldn't he bring in lots of money? None of this happened. He was able to, because of his background, and the time period again. The time that he was active was similar to the 1960s in America, where people, and particularly the decadent rich class, were playing with occultism, and it was fashionable. So he attracted a lot of unbalanced, crazy women to him that he used to act like he was not a homosexual, because he married these women, and who eventually were driven mad and sent into insane asylums or killed themselves. What a nice chap. So make sure you get all his books, because you can get the same kind of results from that his wife did. You can end up in an insane asylum, and if you're lucky, you can cut your own throat. Get the Crowley books. Many volumes at ridiculously low prices. So, with all that stated, I mean, that's the bottom line. I would love to see one of these nut jobs, including the new ones. And I'm going to cover the born-again New Age black magic Satanists as well. I've already discussed all the old schoolers, from the Church of Satan to the Temple of Set, and all those two-faced liar, unachiever, Crowleyite types. But we don't want to forget the new group coming up of squatting little twerps. So he achieved nothing. He died in poverty and died a drug addict. Doesn't that tell you enough? So, as I said, the only reason he was able to indulge or to act like he did is because he had this wealth that was given to him, and he was able to get a few jobs here and there because of his Illuminati training, and write a few things to make a few pence here and there, and so forth. But without that, he would have had nothing, and it would never have been known, and it would have been as simple as that. As he said, he would have been nothing more than a homosexual prostitute on the street of London, and that is not an exaggeration. Let's get real. And you need to look at that. What have they achieved? I mean, the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey, had a big spurt. He sold over 1 million books. The problem is 1 million books of paperback $3 editions don't pay you much, and you don't get rich from that. He died in poverty and with nothing. The Church of Satan really has never went anywhere. It is an established group with a certain following, but it's certainly not a phenomenon. It died out in 1975. The church went bankrupt because of lack of participation, which was then the coup de grace, was that Anton couldn't even control his own wife, who divorced him and destroyed what was little left of the church. Then you have Temple of Set people all work for the government. It's amusing. They're great individualists, yet they're in that great individual institution called the military, or work for colleges or state organizations where you have all sorts of freedom. and they have achieved nothing. So the point is that it would be nice to see somebody have a mansion somewhere and have a yacht and have 50 girls following them. None of them have this. None of them do that. It's a big joke. So in terms of decadence, they don't even come close to it. And that's because they can't manifest it, because they don't have any power. And that's the same thing with Aleister Crowley. Plain and simple, there's nothing he ever did. He was involved in serious law cases that he needed to win to give him credibility and even make him money. He lost. And he lost and lost and lost. He even clearly states that McGregor finally got sick of him and the fact that he stole even books from him that he had translated, attacked him, and seriously affected him, even getting a servant to attack him with a knife, all credited by his own mouth to McGregor being able to produce. Yet he was never able to affect anybody. And the gossip is that because McGregor died at a time when he was in conflict with Crowley, that he had something to do with it. Well, it's just not true. At that particular time, there was a huge flu going around that killed millions and millions and millions of people around the world. And flus used to do that constantly. Hundreds of thousands of people a year would die from flus before penicillin and antibiotics. And interesting enough, the gossip is that McGregor's body was never found because he was able to ascend and actually achieve the ultimate goal. And at least there is an illusion or thought or a mystery or a mythology around McGregor to give him some sort of credit. Yet we all know that Crowley died a drug addict in a flop house. Plain and simple. That's what he achieved after all his years. So hopelessly addicted to heroin, and that's what he did. So it didn't happen that way, and to give him credit for affecting him when a time when millions of people were dying around the world just is ridiculous. Because he never affected anybody else. There's nobody else he ever cursed and died. The point is, he never did anything. I'm not sure he had any magical abilities whatsoever. His books of babbled writing are just copied from others, and there's just not anything there. He just didn't produce, period. And everything he got into failed because he was unable to sustain it, including his little perverse commune in Italy, which he set up and did nothing but debase stuff and claimed to drink cat's blood. And other people drank cat's blood and died from it there, which he refused to get doctors for, which I mentioned. And other types of animal sacrifices. And of course, when you start doing all these things, you're accused of all sorts of terrible things, including sacrifice of babies, which I frankly doubt he did, but who knows what he did with some of his traveling into backward countries and other things that he did for periods of time, and his time spent in Mexico and other places. I mean, for a few dollars, you can kill people very easily in these kind of things. Who knows what he did and didn't even admit to? Because you certainly are not going to get any positive bad boy press if you state to be murdering babies or people and doing human sacrifice. You can say how evil you are, what kind of a sex-mad person you are, and there's an intrigue to that. And but when you start stepping over that line and saying you're murdering people and sacrificing people and even animals past a certain degree, you're going to lose credibility. Plain and simple. So there's absolutely nothing that I can trace that he's ever achieved or was brought any large amounts of money. You can judge for yourself the boring, rotten literature he produced. But it's far from profound. It's far from very interesting. And, there are those slavish groups of goofballs that follow his work, just like the goofballs in the OTO who like to state all these great rituals, and how spiritual they are, and they write these long books on their boring system, a made-up system by a bunch of goofballs. They claim they got somewhere from the Middle East, from Arabs, of course, but these Arabs knew the secret Templar system. Well, I thought all the Templars got everything from the Arabs. That's the other mythology nonsense. So, it's all twisted around nonsense. And it survives today because of Crowley's sex magic they brought. It's a sex magic cult and that's what it's all about. And that's why it survived today, and that's why it goes, and that's why so many of these older cults survived, is because they're all sex magic cults. But it being a Crowley sex magic cult means that it's homosexual based. And I've never known a person in the OTO who wasn't homosexual. Now, whether they're all homosexual, who knows? But I'll tell you one thing, a large majority of them are. But I mean, if you want to get to the highest degree, that means you have to participate in homosexual sex. And of course, they don't want to talk about that they want to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, and they don't even mention that. And it just shows you what kind of deceivers they are. Because they think they can do to you what they did to Crowley. And that is, they're going to manipulate you through sexuality, then ultimately take you to the promised land where they can bugger you. So the point is, that's what they want to do, just like Crowley wanted to do. And of course, as I said, he used his money to buy his way in there as well. So, I mean, that is pretty much Crowley's entire life. This is what he's done. He has done nothing. He achieved nothing. Every group that he ever went into either threw him out or he refused to spend the time to do. So he's not this schooled person who achieved all these high levels of magical empowerment. People like to state that because apparently he went through the first degree of the Golden Dawn easily and quickly. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I tend to doubt that. But he played the game because he wanted to go higher and get into the organization. And I'm assuming the first degree, like most first degrees, are pretty damn easy. I mean, it's basic teachings, basic everything. He certainly was able to learn and got his little degrees and went through the colleges. I'm not sure that getting past the first Golden Dawn degree is much of an achievement. But other than that, everything else he bought or made up that he got. So he's a failure in the magical world because he never really achieved much there. He's written a bunch of gobbledygook books and a couple of semi-practical books, mostly copied from others. And he was notorious for taking inner order information and sharing it with the public. The only organization that he ever got involved with, which he didn't start, was the OTO. He took over, was given that, and then he rewrote the entire order stuff so he could put in his own little buggering magic. He has absolutely nothing to show for anything except these books that were laughed at that particular period of time that were then picked up by some Black Lodge radicals to reinvent him, to take another generation of occultists and move them in the wrong direction and in the perverse direction to actually depower them and to move them into the dark path of destruction, which of course then they feed off of you, as the Black Lodge does, by having you nothing more than a slave to evil. So anybody that reads anything about him cannot really come up with anything that this guy has done. Now, some people like to say his writings are good and profound. Well, that's your personal opinion. If you like that, I guess that's up to you. But I have certainly never seen any of his work to be any particularly profound in any way whatsoever. And again, it's written in your typical high school manner, so people tend to be impressed by it, even if it told you how to wipe your ass. People would be impressed by it because, he used such fancy British words for wiping your ass. I mean, it was so poetically done. So he basically left a legacy of destruction behind him. Bodies of a bunch of people, dead cultists who tried to learn from him, his major apprentice was madly in love with him, and he abused him horribly. the line of women, so-called wives that were driven insane, and those that committed suicide. Other people who died because we refused to help them get medical care. But he wrote a couple of really fancy books. Oh, yes, they're such fancy books. Thank God that guy died for that crap. So there's nothing to this person. I'm really sick and tired of hearing all this crap about this guy, of how wonderful and great, and it doesn't add up whatsoever. Just like all these other old school Satanists, old school Temple of Setters, and the new breed of huckster, born-again, New Age, black magic magicians that are coming up now telling us how godlike they are. It's really amusing. And the old schoolers who have now, with the help of their little mafia buddies, are now even getting their books published by more mainstream people. It's really amusing to see all these people who have produced absolutely nothing talk about how great they are. And there's not even an illusion with Crowley that he ever produced anything other than the self-published books that all these people do. They all self-publish their books because nobody else will publish them. And if you're going to scream around how tough and powerful you are and how you can control people, that doesn't add up. But even these self-published books, which some people in modern business world have made millions from doing that, because that way you get all the profits, they didn't make anything from it. They made very little, just like the modern people did. Even the Church of Satan with Anton LaVey, whose book was published in an inexpensive paperback edition by a major publisher, Avon, was actually a mistake because he made less money doing that. Yes, you got a lot of publicity, but a $3 paperback isn't going to pay you very much in royalties, and that's exactly what he found out. And in his bankruptcy and divorce papers, he was only making $20,000 a year's claimed income at that particular period of time. In 1975, which was, very low money. So even though he sold 1 million copies, he didn't benefit from it. If he would have self-published, had the smarts, the ability to get that to the public himself, and would have sold it at a premium. But one thing he caught on for, just like the Necronomicon book, which is published by the same Avon, which is a division of the Hearst Publishing Empire, is quite interesting. They're popular because they were cheap. That's part of it. And they were in every store. You didn't have to mail order them. You didn't have to worry about mommy finding them. You went to the local bookstore and you bought it for $3. That's the reason why they sold so much. So that's another reason why they're popular. Not necessarily because they're all that good, but because they were very accessible. And one of the few books that were accessible at that time. I mean, there were other paperbacks of magical traditions done at those times by major publishers, but they were not that many. And this was the in thing. This was the social network at that time. Oh, everybody had that. So they all cheated themselves out of that. And certainly the Temple of Set's never published any mainstream books that have sold much of anything. And 20 years later now, they're hooking up and trying to get mainstream books out there now, which is quite interesting. They weren't able to do anything at their peak power times, but all of a sudden now that the Black Lodge is taken over occultism, the New World Order, the Illuminati, and is dominating it to destroy the White Lodge, all of a sudden their books are published. Isn't that interesting? By the great inner traditions. Well, we really know where they're at, don't we? So, all in all, these things are quite evident of whether you can either manifest or not. And in the bottom line, all occultism, whether it's a spiritual effect or a physical effect, it's about manifesting it. I mean, people like to give credit to yogis and the Tibetans because they're able to levitate and sit in the snow and it melts around them, or they are assumed to have this mystical power and ability to manifest whatever that is. Certainly wasn't protecting themselves from the Chinese who murdered millions of them, but that's another story. So a lot of this Tibetan mythology comes from the Nazis who built them up as something great and then tried to connect themselves to the Tibetans. But in terms of reality, the Tibetans again don't manifest much. Whether you believe that they have a great philosophy that everybody should follow, that's a spiritual question for yourself personally. And it doesn't mean anything negative about them, and I don't want to express that way, but there's certainly nothing they've manifest. And that's what we're talking about here. Because when it comes to occultism, and particularly the occult sciences, the science of magic, it's all about manifesting. And that's ultimately how anybody in this field should be judged. Other than that, it is spiritual. When you get into spiritual, there is certain manifestations there as well that should be. I mean, people should be able to be totally at peace at life, don't have problems and everything else. Yet the Dalai Lama has been alleged to have many illegitimate children and eat steaks and everything else they're not supposed to do. But that's being human. I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all, but in terms of their preaching, it is. But there is a spiritual effects too that manifest in the material world, meaning you should be a happy person, and so forth, and whatever you're supposed to get at a spiritual path. But it's a little more nebulous in spiritualism. But again, something should happen, and should be judgeable at least by you individually. Now, when you get into magic, it should be judged by everybody. You either have it or you don't. If you end up broke and a drug addict, you have whatever system you're following. I would say that's not something to get involved in. And that goes with all these people. Where are all these people who talk tough, and where are their manifestations? I don't see them. They are not there. When you research people's actual lives, you come up with the most ridiculous stories that you can possibly think of. It almost is like fiction. It's so ridiculous of what they have not been able to manifest when they claim they are so powerful. I mean, it's just absurd. And a prime example of that is Aleister Crowley. He did nothing. He produced nothing. He left a pile of goofball literature that has little value. I certainly am not going to follow or take seriously a jokester, black magic, satanic possessed, homosexual failure drug addict and take his writing seriously, which he has warped and changed anytime he wanted to suit his position. Plain and simple. Every single thing he wrote or translate has his spin on it. When he started, when he got involved in the OTO with all its gobbledygook, basic philosophical nonsense and the Gnostic masses and all that other nonsense that the OTO started with, what did he do? He put in all his sex magic, including his own personal preferences, which as supreme, not as part of this. Well, if you like this, or you want to be bisexual, or you are homosexual, here's some practice. No, that top degree is homosexual. That should tell you of where he's coming from. And that's what when he built an organization, that's what he built into it. And that's the practices he did. When he did rituals, they involved all sorts of strange, perverse sexualities, including sacrificing animals during the processes and using huge amounts of drugs as well, which people don't talk about. These magical rituals weren't done from some intellectual power stage. Oh yes, we can draw some nice power doing these perverse things and butt fucking each other and killing animals at the time of orgasm. Oh yes, so we'll just all get in line to do that. Yeah, of course, take all this heroin and drugs and all these other opiates and hallucinogens. So he's big into mushrooms and all the hallucinogens before other people were. and people were wasted out of their mind when they did all these practices, because you generally don't get people to do stuff like this unless they're whacked out, including himself. So here we go again, the illusion of nonsense. But, if you're going to be an occult scientist, which is the highest level of occultism you can be involved in, which means you're not involved in delusional nonsense, delusional stupidity of religion, delusional stupidity of black magic, delusional stupidity of some higher paths that's so sacred, like a religion, which basically is nothing more than being a slave to ignoramus philosophies. So if that's what an occult scientist is all about. All other paths are vulgar, self-indulgent paths of no power and have no abilities, and the people involved in them are all losers. There is no other path but that path. But the occult scientist looks at the facts of it, and you can always question, you can always tell that's interesting, that can be investigated if the end result to it produces something, and it doesn't. And that's the bottom line. So thanks for listening, and believe nothing and question everything. Let the guild be your guide.